So guys, welcome to Chernobyl, Ukraine. I came here expecting to feel like some brave explorer, but honestly guys, I just feel like I'm trespassing in someone else's apocalypse. I mean, this is one of the most radioactive places on Earth, a land that time didn't just forget, it filed for divorce from it. Over 350,000 people were told to pack up, run, and never come back. And yet, some did. Just 5 blocks from here, a Ferris wheel is rusting away, frozen mid-spin, and the silence here is almost theatrical, like someone turned the volume down on humanity. And this right here is what they call a hotspot, just a random piece of moss in the forest, still screaming with radiation from 1986. This is the Chernobyl everyone knows. Invisible, deadly, and absolutely terrifying. So how do you explain that in the most radioactive place on Earth, some people chose to come back? That's exactly what I came here to find out, to walk through the silence, meet the few who refuse to leave it, and understand what home really means when your soil itself is poison. From my findings, the story that led to this disaster started on April 26, 1986, the day a late-night safety test at reactor number 4 went dangerously wrong. The reactor exploded, and the fire that followed burned for over a week, spitting radioactive dust into the sky. Experts say it released as much radiation as hundreds of Hiroshima bombs. The immediate human cost was brutal. 2 plant workers died in the blast, and 28 firefighters and plant staff would soon succumb to acute radiation sickness. The long shadow of sickness and cancer that followed has been studied for decades, and the UN estimates that thousands eventually died from exposure. After the explosion, the Soviets threw together a giant concrete box to trap the radioactive mess. Later, they went bigger, building a massive steel arch called the New Safe Confinement to keep the worst of it locked away. Impressive engineering, massive failure? Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. We're on our way to Pripyat, the abandoned city near Chernobyl, and it feels like driving into a forgotten memory. Forests have swallowed up whole villages. Bus stops lean on their sides like tired old men waiting for buses that stopped coming decades ago. I got a special permit to visit this part of Chernobyl, but only for a few hours. I had to wear disposable coveralls and was told to toss out my clothes after leaving the site. I'm not a researcher, but next time I might just bring a full hazmat suit, for extra peace of mind. I was also required to join a guided tour. Apparently, wandering off alone in a radioactive zone isn't encouraged here. My guide didn't say much, he just kept his eyes on the road, like small talk might accidentally wake something that's been sleeping under the soil since 1986. And then, out of nowhere, like a mirage made of concrete, it appeared, the ghost city itself, Pripyat. As I walk through the central square of Pripyat, my footsteps echo like I'm the only person left in the world. A mural of a Soviet cosmonaut flakes under my hand. Once a symbol of glory, now just cracked paint and silence. I learned that Pripyat was once a promise, the perfect Soviet city founded in 1970 for science, progress, and family life. It was home to the workers of the Chernobyl plant and their kids. This right here was supposed to be the future. Then, one night, nearly 50,000 people were told to evacuate just for 3 days. They packed a few things, got on buses with engines still warm and hearts already breaking, and most never came back. I was told the amusement park is one of the most radioactive spots in Pripyat, especially the areas covered in moss and leaves. Apparently, during the cleanup, helicopters sprayed chemicals to contain the fallout, but a lot of that radioactive dust just washed straight into the soil. Now, the ground around the Ferris wheel is particularly notorious. Nice to look at, but definitely not the place for a picnic. The Ferris wheel was supposed to open for May Day celebrations, just 5 days after the explosion, but it never got the chance. Standing beneath it now, listening to the rusty creak of metal in the wind, I can almost feel the weight of futures that never happened. Nature, of course, doesn't wait for anyone. I can see trees punch through balconies, birds nest in old nurseries, and vines crawl over everything like they own the place, which at this point, they kinda do. But as I walked away from that rusting Ferris wheel, something changed. Because beyond these overgrown streets, there are people who came back. They ignored the rules, shrugged off the radiation warnings, and chose to live among the ghosts. And I knew then I had to meet them. So guys, I'm back in the small, abandoned villages inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where about 150 people still somehow call this radioactive ghostland home. On top of that, hundreds of temporary workers live here too, doing jobs connected to the power plant, radiation monitoring, and even tourism. Yeah, tourism in Chernobyl. I met an 84-year-old woman named Maria, chopping potatoes. She and others like her call themselves the Samosely, which basically means the self-settlers. They're the ones who snuck back in or flat out refused to leave after the evacuation. I sat with Maria at a rough wooden table while a guard translated for me, looking half bored, half amused, like he'd seen this scene play out 100 times. But Maria's stories weren't funny and they weren't for show. They were real. She told me about another woman, Hanna Zavarotnya, who once told the soldiers sent to evacuate her, "Shoot me and dig the grave, otherwise I'm staying." That's the kind of line that lives deep in the bones of someone who's already survived worse than the invisible danger still floating through the air here. At their peak, more than 1,000 Samosely slipped back into the zone. Today, only a handful remain, scattered across quiet, crumbling villages. They're stubborn, not stupid, and most of them are elderly. They don't have a plan or a blueprint for life here. What they do have is the soil where their families are buried. Maria's laughter bounces off the trees like an act of rebellion. She doesn't care about radiation charts or Western documentaries. What she cares about is her garden, her chickens, and her right to live and die on her own terms. Maria takes me to her garden and proudly lifts a potato like it's an Olympic gold medal. Chickens cluck around our feet and a dog snores lazily in the sun. Daily life here looks like a mix between a vintage postcard and a science experiment. They raise chickens, grow potatoes that, if you believed every bad joke, might have a faint radioactive glow. They fetch water, chop wood, and fish. Over time, they've learned survival tricks. Washing, boiling, avoiding certain mushrooms and fish, the kind of knowledge you only pick up after living decades in a radioactive neighborhood. Guys, I've got this handy little gadget called a Geiger counter, which is basically a radiation detector that clicks faster the more radiation it senses. What I found really fascinating was that my Geiger counter started yelping at a patch of moss near Maria's fence. But Maria just laughed it off like it was no big deal. However, when we stepped inside her kitchen, the clicks instantly calmed down to normal. That's the thing. Radiation fallout isn't spread evenly. It's patchy and unpredictable. One spot can be dangerously hot, while just a few steps away, it's almost perfectly safe. And somehow, that strange inconsistency is part of why staying here makes sense to them. They even have humor about it. Ivan, one of the locals, joked that his vegetables only grow when it rains, because that's when the fresh, radioactive dust gets washed off the trees and onto the soil. Dark humor? Absolutely. But for them, it's also armor, using laughter as a survival skill. And then there's the hospitality. Oh, the hospitality here is legendary, to say the least. Maria cuts me a slice of fresh bread from her oven and pours me a shot of samogon, which is basically homemade moonshine strong enough to make your ancestors cough. Honestly, at first, I was so skeptical about accepting, but refusing would be rude and accepting felt, well, mildly crazy. So I ate, I drank, I did not start glowing, at least not visibly, but I did learn something important. When someone offers you bread in a place the world calls uninhabitable, the real currency isn't food, it's trust. After eating Maria's bread and sipping her moonshine, I realized this wasn't really about risk. It was about routine, about meaning. So the real question isn't, how can they live here? It's, how could they live anywhere else? I watched Maria sitting meditatively on her stoop, hands folded in her lap, the kind of hands that look like they've wrestled life and won. After spending hours talking with her and some of the locals, I realized something. Choosing to stay here isn't about courage or madness. It's about history, trauma, stubbornness, and grief, all tangled together into a decision nobody else could make for them. I mean, most of these people lived through things far worse than invisible radiation. They survived starvation under Stalin's Holodomor, and they endured the horrors of World War II. After that, the threat of radiation, something you can't see or touch, feels almost abstract. As Maria told me, radiation doesn't scare me, starvation does. It's raw, brutally honest, and deeply human. Many who were forced out of here never recovered. A technician once told me that older evacuees often died of heartbreak after being relocated, torn from their homes, their land, their memories. Maria looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you leave, you die." And I think it's true. Now, medically speaking, it's quite complicated. Most of the Samosely were already elderly when they returned, and some spots they live in actually show near normal radiation levels. Fallout wasn't evenly spread. Still, the long-term risks are still real. Higher thyroid cancer rates, other lasting effects in exposed populations. Still, when your day-to-day life means tending a garden, feeding chickens, and visiting the graves of people you loved, the distant idea of future risk just doesn't weigh as much as the immediate ache of losing your home. It's hard to leave Maria's porch without feeling humbled. And as I walk back to the van, I can't help but wonder, what happens to a world that keeps moving on when its ghosts choose to stay behind? I'm back in my hotel, and I can't shake the thought that Chernobyl's exclusion zone is like a living museum of contradictions. Without people, wildlife has exploded. Wolves, boar, lynx, and even rare birds. It's a shocking twist of fate that the animals are doing better in this radioactive wasteland than they did when humans were around. In fact, scientists are still studying them, finding that many animals have higher levels of radioactivity in their bodies, yet the forests are alive and buzzing in ways no one expected. Tourism, too, has found its way into the zone. After pop culture turned tragedy into entertainment, the ghost streets of Pripyat became a destination. Now, guided tours walk visitors through the ruins, and if you stick to the rules, the radiation dose you get is about the same as a transatlantic flight. Tourism brings money and awareness, sure, but it also risks turning grief into a photo opportunity. Watching people pose and smile in front of the Ferris wheel felt strange to me, like a quiet kind of disrespect wrapped in good lighting. As we drove out of the zone, I saw life returning where death once ruled. Wolves, moose, even wild horses roamed freely, as if nature looked at our failure and said, "Cute attempt, now move aside." It made me think about something deeper, how humans everywhere cling to what defines them, even when the world tells them to let go, which reminded me of a people half a planet away, the Toraja people of Indonesia. I recently visited the Toraja people of Indonesia, who treat the dead as if they're still part of daily life. They dress their mummified loved ones, walk them through town, and talk to them like family who never really left. To Western eyes, it can look shocking, even eerie. But at its heart, it's about the same thing that ties people everywhere together: love, memory, and belonging. The Samoselys of Chernobyl aren't strange or irrational either. They're just human, holding on to the same unshakable bond with home that the Toraja hold with their ancestors. Whether it's mummies in Indonesia, graves in Ukraine, or a babushka's garden of potatoes, love of place can be stronger than fear itself. Two cultures, two corners of the world, yet both refusing to let go. The message is the same. Love doesn't follow logic, it lingers. And maybe that's the truth the rest of us keep forgetting. And I must admit that leaving Chernobyl felt heavier than arriving. I came here expecting to document abandonment, but what I found was devotion. The Samoselys completely rewired how I think about resilience. They've chosen quality of life, the small human moments, over the promise of more years if those years mean nothing. So why didn't they? Well, it's not that they forgot the danger, they just measured it differently. They knew the risks and chose meaning anyway. The land where their parents are buried, the smell of fresh bread, the right to wake up and do the work they've always done. For them, that's worth any danger. Thanks for joining me on this journey, guys. Kindly hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more eye-opening travel content like this. See you in the next adventure.